Welcome to Pigeon River Farm, doing farming right. I'm Robert Brown, the owner of Pigeon River Farm. Thank you for viewing. Well, hello. In this episode, we're going to have a chance to watch a recorded video, one that I had recorded at the Grassworks conference in the early part of February. It was fabulous. Dan Kittredge, been an organic farmer for over 30 years, very knowledgeable, has undertaken an interesting project. I saw him initially, heard a little bit about it back in the organic conference in the late teens, and got my interest, and here a chance to see him in person, have a chance to talk to him at the Grassworks conference. And as you'll see watching this is excellent information, all about nutrient density. Nutrient density in the food that we consume, and as farmers and ranchers, as we produce. I really think it's going to be a game changer. I really, truly believe it's going to be phenomenal. So you'll have a chance here. It's about an hour and a half long. Great information. He didn't have any slides, so I did is I put some B-roll up in the upper right-hand corner from my farm and some of the other Grassworks farms that I had. All drone footage. Something kind of keep an eye on as you're watching it. So I thank you and enjoy the film.
With that, we are continuing to forge ahead, and I would like to introduce our morning keynote speaker, Dan Kittredge. I first spoke with Dan about coming to speak at Grassworks from my tractor while I was doing some fall seeding. Dan is also a second generation regenerative farmer, and we spoke about being at conferences, and his parents were some of the early organic farmers on the East Coast, and he talked about having dinner with Wendell Berry, which I thought was pretty cool. Dan is the executive director of the Bionutrient Food Association, and maybe I'll just let you continue and introduce yourselves. Let's give Dan a round of applause.
Thank you, Rachel. All right, I think I've learned from yesterday that I have to hold them like horizontally, not vertically. So, if and when it begins to drip down and I can't just remind me, okay? I'm not used to this. Yes, this is a wonderful community. It feels totally like home. Grass-fed, grassroots, local, homestead, community culture. I'm honored these days to get to speak to groups like this around the country and in other countries, and I have to say, there's a bunch of people like us all over the place doing really good stuff that you might not have heard about because they're too busy doing it and not talking about it. But an honor to be in front of you, and appreciation for everything that's been done over the past 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I'm sure people were doing stuff before you guys started having events. But there's a really nice grassroots bubbling up going on all over the place. Just want to say that. Just a quick background on myself. I did grow up on a organic farm, homestead, mixed operation, milking cows by hand, and pigs, chickens, ducks, turkeys, fruit trees, vegetables, certified organic in 86. I think we started our CSA in 91. My parents were the kind of farmers that couldn't make a living farming, and so I had a day job. And their day job was running the local organic farming organization called NOFA, Northeast Organic Farming Association. My father was the editor of the journal. They ran the annual conference together. My mother was the executive director of the state chapter. There's seven state chapters in the Northeast. So I do have that sort of background and perspective. When I got married and had found no other viable income stream or skill set than farming, and worked on the farm in the summertime and traveled the world in the wintertime and done all kinds of interesting things. I set about trying to provide for a family by farming and realized that I, like my parents, couldn't make a living doing it. And I thought, I'd been told that organic was better, but for many reasons it sure looked like my plants were not flourishing. Being attacked by insects, being attacked by disease, limited flourishment, and things like that. Lots of work. I knew how to work. I just didn't know how to create a dynamic where my plants were healthy. I would argue, this is actually one of my central insights getting me going on this process was I was heading out from after lunch, had a 5-gallon bucket in my hand. We were going to the potato patch, and we were about to knock potato bugs off potato plants. We did that every 2 days to keep them alive. Kids have potato bugs out here? Colorado potato beetles, you know what those guys are? Yeah. And I was checking on our old farm dog, Snowball, who had been recently driven over by a CSA member, just his rear end. Got ground into the driveway and he had a cut, and I was checking on it. And there was, flies had laid eggs, and the eggs had hatched, and there were maggots eating the dead flesh in his wound. And I just about lost my lunch. And I stopped to think about it for a second. There's larvae eating my dog alive, and I'm like absolutely shocked. But there's larvae eating my plants alive, and I think it's totally normal. And I think that actually there's some really interesting patterns here, which we don't have time to go into today because that's not my topic. But it certainly is what got me going on this whole thing. I figured, actually there was an issue of the Natural Farmer of the journal my father edited that was being done. It was a quarterly journal, it was like broadsheet, and every quarter there was a theme, and the theme that quarter was, is organic better? And there was this whole argument about organic versus conventional, and I was like, maybe we should frame it as what's better than organic? Is there more than just this organic versus non-organic dynamic? What's going on here? And so I was reading books and starting to ask questions, and that led me on a path to the Acres USA community, where I was able to access a lot of sort of integrated perspective and wisdom. I hope some of you here have been able to download from that circle. It's not what it used to be, but there definitely is a lot that was carried forth there. It was there that I heard about this thing called bricks, which was a way that you could actually assess how healthy your plant was. We would put the plants in the ground and then maybe mulch them, hope, and then the powdery mildew would come, or the flea beetles would come, and they're like, okay, well, we got to plant another series of brassicas or cucumbers, whatever it is. This whole concept that you could squish the leaf and see how healthy the plant was and get a number was revelatory for me, right? I'd never been exposed to that before. And the whole concept that maybe there's a connection between that, the plant health, not just in pest and disease resistance and vigor, but also nutrient levels, something I'd never been exposed to. And really, really struck a chord with me. So this was about 15 years ago. I was engaging primarily because I needed to figure out how to make a living, because I had a wife and started a family. And it really didn't take too long when you start to engage nature, the land, in a way that sort of supports life, as opposed to just doing what you've always done before, till and plant and actually understand how plants have evolved to be. What is the dynamic by which they've been working just fine without fertilizer for hundreds of millions of years. Indigenous cultures globally have been doing an amazing job in symbiosis with nature, in continent-wide scale, with no beast of burden, with no plow, with no fertilizer. Right? It's not like it can't be done. It's just that we have to understand how to work with the system. So I was able to sort of download a lot of that from the Acres community, and in fairly short order begin to get those results where pests were gone, diseases were gone, yields were up, cost of production was down, and I was able to make a living working part-time on my farm, like literally paying the bills working 20 hours. And I said, oh my God, I grew up on an organic farm, and my parents ran an organic farming organization, and I didn't know any of this stuff. And I felt an obligation to talk about it. I've been profoundly shy. When I got offered a part in a high school musical, I said no. I don't want to talk in front of people. But either way, I felt like I needed to start talking about it, so I started talking about it. And getting courses and workshops, and in 2010 started an educational organization called the Bionutrient Food Association, with a mission to increase quality in the food supply. And by quality, we're talking about flavor, aroma, nutritive value, health-giving attribute. We don't care what you call yourself, local or organic or regenerative or permaculture or IPM or, your identity doesn't matter as far as your label. What matters is the actual quality of the food. There's Methodists and Presbyterians and Jews and Muslims. Like, as far as I'm concerned, the question is what's your relationship to God, not, how do you identify yourself? What's the quality of the food you're producing? It's about the nutritional value. That really is, as far as we're concerned, sort of the high ground we're trying to organize around. And so we started giving workshops, courses around the country, started regionally and sort of spread through word of mouth around the country and then to other countries now. It sure looked like the more well you work with nature, the more well things do. It doesn't matter whether it's wheat or cucumbers or apples or blueberries. Doesn't matter if it's the Northeast or the Southwest. Doesn't matter if it's a desert area or it's really about the function of life in the ecosystem. The bottom of the food chain, the microbiome, being maintained and supported. When you have that, when you're managing for that, then things work more well. And so my thought was, wow, if it's true that working with nature works better, we obviate the need for agrochemicals. You don't need fertilizer. You don't need insecticides and fungicides. Your cost of production goes down. Farm viability goes up. Health goes up. This is kind of exciting, right? This is kind of exciting, the opportunities here, because, I didn't talk about that, but when I was in my 20s and the part of the year I wasn't farming, I was traveling the world being an activist and sort of trying to find, something to do with my life. Fighting this, fighting that, etc. Politics, activism. And I thought, if we could organize around working more well with nature, we could solve some serious problems. We could solve some ecological problems. We could solve some toxins in the environment problems. We could solve some human health problems. Look at the politics about how the farm bill's done. There's some systemic issues that probably people here are conversant with and have said are overwhelming and I'd like to have them change, but I don't know how I can have a meaningful effect on it. But I thought that if we could organize around food quality strategically, we might be able to actually have some significant effect. So as I was teaching my courses, 2010, 2012, 2014, it was mostly about how to work more well with nature, what are the principles and how to do it, but also it was this vision of, is it possible that we could give people who are buying food the ability to choose based on quality? Like anybody here who's maybe considered purchasing a tomato at a grocery store at this time of year, maybe you don't do it because you know better, but you certainly know the difference between what's in the grocery store right now and what is in your garden in August, right? Because you're an animal, because you're wired with a really sophisticated nutrient monitoring system, which helps you discern between those two tomatoes. You've had a peach off of the tree that was ripe and a peach off the shelf, right? You know that they're not the same. And yet, according to the USDA, all food is uniform. All carrots have this in them, all wheat has that in it, all milk has this in it, right? In the sort of reductionist, mechanistic, quote-unquote scientific reality culture we've been brought up in, the dominant paradigm, it's like number 2 plastic and number 5 plastic, right? They're all considered to be uniform. And it sure looks like what you build your body out of affects your function. And a lot of people these days are starting to experience physiological degeneration, whether it's themselves, or their children, or their grandchildren, or their partners, or everybody in your life. We have epidemic levels of chronic disease, and nothing like a little visceral incentive, right? Like the greater good, saving the world, reversing climate change, those are all sort of conceptual ideals. But when you physiologically are falling apart or your children are struggling, all of a sudden it gets much more visceral. There's this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, perhaps people have heard about. But self-interest is where you start. And the greater good is nice. But my thought was we can align self-interest, people's self-interest. Most people don't grow food, right? For better, for worse, I say for worse. Most people buy food, I say for worse. Most people should be growing their food, I think, but that's how I grew up, so I'm biased. But people who do buy food, if we could give them the opportunity to choose what they purchase based on its inherent nutritional value, which connects to flavor, which connects to health, which connects to soil health, which connects to the environment. That may be something we could organize around. And not fighting GMOs or fighting this or fighting that, but as something we're building towards. I think there's a really important conceptual piece here, which is that where you put your energy is where your energy goes. Have you heard about that one? If you're busy fighting something, you're actually putting energy into that, versus when you're building something, you're putting your energy into that. And so I think it's been a sleight of hand to where a lot of us have been tricked or distracted. Like, I'm anti-Trump, I'm anti-Biden. I don't care who you're anti, the point is you're anti, and that's missing the point. What are you pro? What are you focusing on? What are you building towards? So, the basic idea here is if we can support people in choosing the food for themselves and their families that's best for them, that will apply an economic incentive throughout the supply chain to focus on producing quality as opposed to volume. Because right now, we get paid for volume, not for quality. So, yeah, that's a long introduction, but the work we've been doing is what I want to talk about here in this presentation. I think context is helpful. So, the basic idea, how would you be able to make those choices? If you got 3 bags of carrots on the grocery store shelf, one's Bunny Love, one's Cal Organic, one's, Bolthouse Farms, how would you be able to tell without biting into them which one's at 20 out of 100, which one's 40 out of 100, which one's 80 out of 100? And our proposal is this technology called spectroscopy, which is basically how the astrophysicists have figured out what these various stars that are 5 light years away or 50 million light years away are made up of, right? If you talk to the scientists, they can tell you what things are made up of that are very, 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 very long distance away. How do they know? It's not like we've sent a probe out there, right? The Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 got sent off in the 70s. They're about a light day away now. Alpha Centauri is 5 light years away. That's the closest star to us, it's not the sun. We're looking at exoplanets 50 million light years away and saying it's got this much oxygen in the atmosphere and this much hydrogen in the atmosphere. How do we know what things are made up of? Because everything in chemistry, copper or zinc or protein, is a vibration of physics, right? Remember that photons and neutrons and electrons and vibration, sort of, remember that from science? Right? Everything is actually a vibration. Protein vibrates, copper vibrates, zinc vibrates, and that vibration is light. So we can literally take a picture of the light coming off of the star and see what it's made up of. We'll say 5 light years away, which is a big long distance. My thought was, if we can do that, why can't we take a picture of the light coming off a carrot a millimeter away and see what it's made up of? So that's basically the idea. And so we started in 2017, seriously on this project. We had 3 basic objectives. One was, can we define the nutrient variation in food? I mean, our thought is, a carrot that tastes good and a carrot that doesn't taste good are different. How much are they different? There's no database out there globally where anybody's looked at this, right? Nobody's actually tried to characterize the difference, like the range of nutrients in carrots, or the range of nutrients in milk, or the range of nutrients in beef. Like, it hasn't been done. You can hypothesize about why it hasn't been done, but the fact is we don't know. We literally don't know in the scientific framework what is the spectrum of variation in nutrients in food. So our first question is, can we characterize, A, is it significant? Is there a meaningful difference in nutrient levels in food? And B, can we characterize it? So that's question 1. The second question is, do nutrient variations in food connect to management practices and environmental system function? Our experience is that when plants are healthier, they're sequestering carbon they don't need fertilizer, and they are pest and disease resistance, and they taste better, and you get longer shelf life. So that's our experience, our lived experience is that, but can we build a data set where we can actually characterize those things? So those nutrients vary very significantly. Do those variations connect to management practices and soil health? And the third question is, can we build a handheld meter that can be available at a consumer price point that can be used to non-invasively flush and let something and get a reading off of it? So our thought was, if those three things could be done, then conceivably we could revolutionize food, the way food is done, right? The food industry, in a meaningful way. So we started, like I said, in 2017, and built our first instrument. And yeah, we built one. It was released at our annual conference that fall. Okay, we've got a handheld meter that we think is going to work. In 2018, we built our first lab. We had people send in just carrots and spinach that year from grocery stores and farmers markets and farms, organic and not organic, Maine and Iowa and Pennsylvania, all over the country. And we were just looking at about 15 different elements, so copper and zinc and phosphorus and potassium, as well as polyphenols and antioxidants. So, compounds that generally correlate with health-giving attribute. I'm not sure, it was about 1,000 carrots and spinach samples we sent in. We didn't send in, people sent in. We assessed. And the variations we found were, we'll say it was calcium in carrots maybe 3-to-1. So this carrot has as much calcium in it per 100 grams of carrot as those three. So 3-to-1. That's a meaningful difference. When we were talking with the scientists beforehand at Cornell and places like that, they're like, maybe it's a 5 or 10% variation. And it's probably mostly to do with genetics. And when it was iron in spinach, it was 15-to-1. So that's like, this leaf of spinach has as much iron in it as those 15 leaves of spinach, which is, I would say, a meaningful variation. And when it was polyphenols and antioxidants, those flavor health-giving compounds, it was more like 50-to-1 or 100-to-1. Not small differences. That was just the first two crops, the first year of the lab. The second year was at our second lab at Chico State in California. We had farmers not only send in the crops, but also send in the soil the crops grew in, and also answer a bunch of questions about how they produced those crops. So did you till? If so, how many times, with what? Did you cover crop? When did you plant? How many species? How did you terminate it? Did you use fertilizer? What was your fertilizer? Did you irrigate? How many times? How deep? Did you side dress? So we would ask the farmers a bunch of questions, and then we'd have them send in the soil and send in the crop that soil grew in. Triplicate samples, so you pull 3 carrots, right? We're not going to just do 1 because we're being scientists. And we had them send it in for the top 6 inches of soil, or top 4 inches, top 10 centimeters, and then the next 10 centimeters. So 3 soil samples shallow, 3 soil samples deeper, and a carrot from each one, or cherry tomatoes, or lettuce, whatever it was. And yeah, we did 6 crops that year. And the variations were similar, right? The elements, 2-to-1, 5-to-1, 10-to-1, the compounds, 25-to-1, 50-to-1, 200-to-1. I think the biggest variation we found so far has been in spinach with, I think it was polyphenols, and it was 364.5-to-1. Which means if you eat this leaf of spinach on January 1st, you'd have to eat 1 of this leaf of spinach every day until December 30th to get the same amount of polyphenols. Right, that's our extreme case. But we're talking like there is a significant variation in nutrient levels in food. That was 2019, 2020. We started our 3rd lab in France. We worked with over 20 different crops. We added, wheat, oats, and potatoes, and beets, and leeks, and summer squash, and, a bunch of different things. Roots, leaves, fruits, and grains. Over 200 farms. Similar process where we ask the farmers all these questions. We have them send in the soil, send in the crops. And every single time the soil or the crop is coming into the lab, we're taking the meter and we're flashing the light at it first. So you flash the light at the carrot, get a picture of the light that bounces back, then you run the carrot through the lab and get the numbers, the calcium level, potassium level. So, because we're trying to basically calibrate a meter to this data. I don't want to be too wonky, but hopefully, I think it's important to actually lay out this process. So at the end of the 2020 data year, which was middle of 2021, we done processing it all. Yeah, nutrients do vary significantly in food. Management practices do connect directly to soil metrics and nutrient levels. And yeah, you can calibrate an instrument, a meter, a consumer price handheld meter, to these variations. So I call that proof of concept. Is it possible to do this? Do these things connect? Yes. We've spent a number of years figuring that out, and it sure looks like they do. And so now we're moving on. So proof of concept is like, yes, it's possible. Then all you have left is the job to do, right? So what is nutrient density? This is a term that I've basically helped create and popularize, starting with Art Anderson. I was just having this conversation with Lynn earlier this morning. At Acres in 2006, 2007, there wasn't really a word for this. People may have heard the term. In food science, nutrient density means something different than what I'm using it to mean. It's kind of like when I was in 4th grade and I told my science teacher I was an organic farmer, and she said, organic means contains carbon. All farmers are organic farmers, you stupid child. And then in 8th grade, or maybe 7th grade, after the LR scare, everybody knew that organic means doesn't have chemicals in it, right? So we got 2 different definitions for the word. So in food science, currently, nutrient density is the average nutrients per unit calorie in rice versus Coca-Cola. So we can say that kale is more nutrient dense than rice because there's more nutrients per calorie in kale than there is in rice on average. I would say there is no average kale, there is no average rice. What matters is the kale that I'm eating, or the rice that I'm eating, or I'm feeding to my children. Is this high quality kale or low quality kale? So that's what we're talking about. When I say nutrient density, I'm talking about, is this kale in the 80th percentile of what it could possibly be, or the 20th percentile of what it could possibly be? And that's foundationally what we're working on now. So proof of concept says copper varies, zinc varies, potassium varies, cobalt varies, polyphenols vary, protein varies. All these things have a high and a low, but a carrot is not copper and potassium. A carrot is a whole thing, right? There's many, many different nutrients in a carrot. And so how do we create a dynamic where we can say, this carrot is in the 80th percentile, this carrot is in the 20th percentile? Because our vision is that you take the meter, I've got one right here, or our prototype version, this is not what it's gonna look like, when it's all done. You wanna take your meter, or not you, because you're farmers, maybe you're a farmer and you wanna be able to see what you're selling, but consumers wanna be able to take the meter and flash a light at this carrot and say, 20 out of 100, 40 out of 100, 80 out of 100. So defining that, defining what is 20, 40, 80 is where we're at right now. And we started with beef, because beef is the crop with the largest global economic footprint, more dollars spent on beef than any other thing, and the largest global ecological footprint, more land spent in the production of beef than any other thing. And for people who care about the climate, we understand that there's some significant opportunities to have beneficial effects on the environment through how we manage our animals, which is why this is a perfect audience for this conversation, I think. And I will be talking about the beef project at the end of the day today, for those who are curious, in a separate presentation. So that's where we're at, basically, is saying, okay, it looks like there's an opportunity here. Now, if we can really do the science and categorically connect these things, and then engineer the next generation of instrumentation so we're able to test it, we think there's a major opportunity to shift the way the food system works, based on people's self-interest, right? If you as a farmer are going to be offered a premium based on the quality of your food, then all of a sudden you've got a much more significant incentive, right? A lot of people, like, I'm getting paid my commodity price, the government's covering anything that's going to happen, why should I change? And a lot of farmers who are doing a good job are like, why am I only getting the commodity price? I would like to be properly compensated for the work that I'm doing. It's not that money is the be-all and end-all. It shouldn't be the be-all and end-all, but to a large degree, it's what drives our decisions in life. So our thought is that we can align the economic interest with the ecological interest, with the health interest. Perhaps we can build a broad-based movement that's aligning these different constituencies. People that care about the environment, people that care about human health and their children, people that care about making a living as a farmer. I think there's an opportunity here for a really amazingly broad-based community to come together around solutions, as opposed to fighting this and fighting that, etc. So I'd like to speak and then engage conversation. I don't know how much time I've got left. I guess there's not too many minutes. But if the people that have questions or would like to engage, I'd love to spend the rest of the time doing that.
Have you published any research?
All of our data is currently on the website bionutrientinstitute.org.
Okay, that's data, but that's different than having been published.
The peer review publication process.
Okay.
Yes, we are in the midst of publishing in peer review all the work that we've done over the past 5 years. I should say that we are a charitable, nonprofit educational organization. We've been running strictly on donations. There is no IP, there's no ownership, right? The engineering for the meter is in the commons, which means anybody who wants to can make them and sell them. The database is all open source, the app is open source. So we've been setting up and running labs, building hardware, doing science on charitable donations. And yeah, it all takes money, and so the peer review publication process is like, okay, extra $100,000. And so we're working on it. It has not been the highest priority. Yeah.
So then, how are you
Follow
going to get money to further your work?
How am I going to get money for the work?
Yeah.
My basic strategy is proceed forward with good intention and trust the universe. It's not necessarily a great business model. It certainly has been difficult. We've gone through ebbs and flows of economic viability over the past number of years, ever since we started this project. Yeah, I think it's a longer conversation we can have. I think where we're at right now, and I can't say this for sure because we haven't made the commitment yet, is to be able to engage farmers with a very short-term turnaround. As in, you send in your sample, you pay for it, but you get the readings back in less than a week. So you can use that data for your market. So wherever you're selling what to, when I'm picking this field of carrots, or I'm picking this block of apples, or I'm harvesting my milk, or whatever it is, that you can be able to say from the USDA average, USDA says this is what's in milk, and you can have data coming back and saying, well, my milk is at 300% on this compound, and 400% on that compound, and 200% on that compound. Our thought is, instead of just waiting for rich people and foundations to give us chunks of money, we can give farmers the ability to, whatever it's going to cost you, $300, $400, $500 per sample. But if it means that you can get a premium on a crop, and you're helping, you get 50 people who are sending in milk samples, we can characterize the variation of milk in 50 samples. It may take 500 samples or 750 samples to say, this is milk at the 80th percentile, this is milk at the 20th percentile. But if we can get people to, pony up a little bit of their own money, because they're going to get some visceral benefit for your marketing purposes. If you've got labels, if you go to the farmer's market, I don't care how you market. But if you can say with some categorical confidence, this is what the USDA says is in kale, and this is what was in my kale last week, we think that may be a way to go from, idealism to pragmatism, and still keep it all open. I'm very committed to this understanding, not belonging to anyone. I saw my parents help write some of the first organic standards in the 80s. I saw the organic movement turn from a grassroots sort of idealistic dynamic to a corporately driven dynamic. And I've seen the standards decrease. And I've seen it foundationally, organic is a binary. I'll speak about organic because I grew up on an organic farm, and I can I can say things about organics. My parents are an organic organization. Organic is a binary. You either are or are not, right? It's not like you are sick or you are not. You are somewhere in a continuum of vitality, right? Everything is in a continuum. Life is a continuum. It's not a binary. This whole reductionist, is paradigm, this black, white, us, them, it's false. It's false. And so, I'm very committed to this understanding all being in the commons, and that means that there's no opportunity for investment. So that's just one of our foundational commitments.
As I'm sure you know, they're working on a mass spectrometer on a chip for its biomedical research for an artificial nose.
Yeah.
And so I'm not concerned about the development of equipment for this, but it seems the intractable problem that you're facing is what exactly are you looking for?
Yes,
What
exactly.
chemicals, what combination of chemicals
Yes.
actually relate to nutrition? So are you planning to use artificial intelligence techniques with a complete chemical analysis to manage your samples?
I would agree with everything except for complete chemical analysis. Yes, you're entirely right. This is exactly what's going on and how we're intending to do it. You have to overlay the humans with common sense with the big data AI stuff. Just when it comes to what's in food, the USDA monitors about 130 compounds in food. There's been about 100,000 compounds that have been published upon in food, like peer-reviewed published literature, and it looks like there's at least 10 million compounds in food. So I'm not proposing we do a complete analysis of food. I'm proposing we find levels and ratios and patterns, and we see those levels and ratios. Yes, we have to look at a lot of compounds before we can bring it down to biomarkers. It's a process. I think you're entirely on it with what you're saying. Yeah.
How would you get people to participate, like different farmers that do have milking cows? How would you protect? Are you working with that already? How do you get people on the spectrum of lower quality milk to higher quality milk to participate in something?
My general policy is to be as Taoist as possible. So I go where invited. Somebody says somebody should have this guy come and talk, and so I show up in this random place and I talk, and then some of you get inspired and you want to find our website and you reach out. It's been, I'm sorry, that was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but there's a website. It's bionutrientinstitute.org. Shauna is the partners coordinator. She's partners at bionutrient.org. Anybody who wants to engage can do so. Our data set right now is certainly skewed towards the better quality. If you don't need that many samples at the bottom of the continuum to say this is where the top and the bottom of the continuum are. So if you got 50 samples and 40 of them were good and 5 are bad. I'll talk about the beef project later, and we're doing that. Our target is 750 steaks, and each farm sends in 3 steaks, and most of those farms are doing a good job. But we're saying we want to have 150 steaks on the shelf because we want to see what's coming out of the CAFOs also, and we're going to assume that's sort of the bottom of the continuum. We don't know yet, but yeah, it's a process. It's a process, and really, it's only going to succeed through a deep global systemic collaboration, and the movement hopefully will be built by people showing up and reaching out and working together. Yeah.
Can you measure CLAs with spectrometers?
Yes.
You can. Okay.
Sir, can you talk a little bit about on the vegetables, the top 10%?
Yeah.
Names of what people did or didn't do in terms of tillage, fertilizer, herbicide. Are there any common trends you saw? It doesn't simplify it.
Yep. Well, I feel affirmed in the data showing, at least so far, that a lot of what I've been talking about as far as how to work with nature seems to be true. Which means that it depends entirely with where you're at, what the things are you need to do. if you're in an area where your soil is dry, then water deficiency is the biggest thing to address. If you're in a place where your soil's been leached out, then mineral deficiency is the thing to address. It sure looks like managing the environment in such a way that the microbiome is operating at a high level is what needs to be done. And you can't say it's this technique or that technique, this process or that product. It's about, what does the bottom of the food chain need to function? They need air to breathe, they need water to drink, they need food to eat, they need some minerals to build their bodies out of. But if at any point in time, any one of those things is missing, then the system is becoming weaker. So it's not like a thou shalt series of things to do. It's about, what does nature need to function more well? And in August, you get different issues than you got in April. And if you're not a sensitive interlocutor with your land, you're going to be missing the point. So it's not a recipe process. It's a engaging with nature process.
Have you looked at some of the indoor growing that's starting to take off, or like whether it's hydroponics?
Yep.
Just growing under lights compared to soil that's in the earth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did do, if you go to our website, we have a hydroponic tomatoes report where we looked and we saw that in average, hydro is much worse than non-hydro. But I will say, organic, some organic is good and a lot of organic is not. You can't really make a distinction by a label. You can do hydro really well. You can do organic really bad. And so it's not like you can hide behind this or hide behind that. It's really about the function of the ecosystem. If you're doing hydroponic systems in a way where you don't have microbiology functioning well, you basically can't build high levels of high order compounds with no microbes. Right? You basically can't do it. So, yeah.
Are the areas interested in doing this testing? And wondering what the future would hold for conventional versus organic? I mean, there's always been this one better than the other. Is there interest in talking to the dairy company?
We have not really stepped into dairy yet. We have not yet. I hope it'll be something that's coming along the pipe. As you hopefully are, maybe you're getting it, this is a grand vision, and we're a small organization. So it's a process. And basically, if people come to us and say, we're in the dairy space and we'd like to collaborate, then we're like, okay, let's figure out how to collaborate. If there's nobody who's doing dairy who reaches out to us, and the people who are doing tomatoes reach out to us, or almonds, then we start working with them. Because we don't have the money or the energy to push an agenda. We're more passive, and I call it being Taoist, going with the flow. Where is the energy coming from to us? Where are the collaborations coming? Where's the interest and the desire? But to the point of organic versus not organic, it's really clear that there's a lot of bad quality organic. And there's some people who are not organic who are doing a really good job. So you can't be, religious, I'm an Episcopalian, you're a Methodist, and damn it, you're bad, we're good. Like, come on, guys. You're just missing the point. It's everything to do with the function of the life in the ecosystem, not with your identity and label. So, yeah, hope that was not too aggressive.
Talking all about positive nutrients, have you done anything?
Yes.
Thought anything about
Anti-nutrients.
chemicals or anything?
Yeah. Great point. So we'll take beef as an example. If you're a cow that's in a CAFO, that's stressed, not getting any exercise, too many people around, kind of bawling, eating bad food, you're going to have stress hormones in your body. You're going to have inflammation markers. You're going to have biochemistry of a pre-diabetic state, right? So there's omega-6, omega-3 ratios. Sure, it can be 1 to 1 over here or 14 to 1 over there, but there's also stress hormones and inflammation markers and stuff like that. So we're focusing more on nutrients. When you look at toxins, those are present in parts per billion concentrations, and so the logistics of doing the science and the cost and things like that, it's not something we've prioritized because it all does cost a bunch of money. But foundationally, the presence of toxins connects really nicely with the limitation of the function of the microbiome. It's going to be basically impossible to have a toxin load and a well-functioning microbiome. So instead of focusing on what's the bad stuff that's present, we're focusing on what's the good stuff that's present. And understanding the way nature works, it sure looks like you can't have lots of good stuff and have bad stuff there also. Or it's a continuum. So that's the basic understanding, but we haven't done the data necessarily to really categorically confirm that, although it sure does look like that's what's going on. Yeah.
This is probably bigger than what you're looking at, and what you're looking at is really cool, but is there any concerns that going down this path could exacerbate food security or equitability to these nutrient-dense foods if a new market gets placed on that as a premium? Do we then find, underserved communities being forced to eat the less nutrient-dense foods regardless of if they're organic or not?
What's,
Sort of tied to that,
I totally get what you're saying.
any additional food waste?
Let me-
ideas or thoughts?
We've run many thousands of samples at this point in time. And we've got all these graphs of, copper and carrots and polyphenols and cucumbers and everything else. If this is 0, or like the first percentile, empty, and this is the 100th percentile, this is what the graphs look like. Right? It's like peak at 20% of what it could be, and then a long tail where almost nothing is above 50%. Like almost nobody is getting 50% or more of what's possible in the food supply. So everybody is getting junk. What's present at Whole Foods is in many cases worse than what's present at Walmart. Fact. We did this food desert experiment a couple years ago where we had people in USDA certified food deserts go to 3 different stores, send in carrots and potatoes and peppers and I can't remember what the other one was, and go to a expensive store 10 miles away, and guys, it's all junk. Basically, what's available in the food supply is embarrassingly poor. Like, I took organic chemistry. My uncle was a professor, and I was like, Uncle Dick, if you had to go to college again, what would you take if you didn't take? He's like, organic chemistry. Oh, great, I'll take organic chemistry. I think my final exam was at 30, my midterm exam was at 15, and I passed. Because they graded on the curve. So everybody's getting a 20. Right now, the bar is low. Right now, what's available in the food supply is 20 out of 100. So if you get to 30, you're looking good. That's not answering your question, but that's context. From my perspective, you want to look at the money that the government is spending on food for people who aren't buying it. Look at, WIC and, there's all kinds of programs, right? There's schools. There's a lot of things that where the government is actually paying for the food that people are eating. And I would say, let's organize around that. Let's organize so that if you're going to be putting a school lunch onto a table at any school, you will only purchase food from above a certain quotient. If you're going to get an EBT card, you can only use the money for food that's above a certain quotient. No one can do everything. But if we organize around this concept of solutions and we use our passion for empowering everyone, we've got hard data and regional empowerment that we can coordinate around, I think the opportunities are massive. And I just want to say, I grew up on a homestead subsistence farm. I've worked on farms in Siberia and in India and in Central America. I've lived on reservations. I am not doing this for North Americans. This is not for those of us who are privileged, quote unquote, privileged, although culturally we're far from privileged, right? Culturally we're just, we are the ones who need some help, right? Everybody else has got some things to offer us. But, you know, how do you create a dynamic where the global commons, the global smallholders are empowered and don't need to move into cities and live in slums because their lands have been worn out? How do we look at this globally and say, we have the opportunity to turn this brown planet green in short order if we apply our efforts intelligently. So, yeah, I mean, we oftentimes in this country sort of, our minds don't go past the boundaries of the US in what our vision is and what our intentions are. And I try to hold that global context as you know, if what we're doing does not align with that global context, then we're missing the point. So, yeah, I think I got the 5-minute warning. Was that 5 minutes of news done?
Yep.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. Dan's got a session about the nutrient density session or study at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So if you want to learn more, you can attend that session.
All right, let's get started here. My name is Ashley Steike, and I'm just here to introduce Dan Kittredge. He's going to talk to us today about nutrient density in the animals that we raise, which is something I think all of us are shooting to increase and make our farms more viable and better. So with that, I'll let him take it away. We're going to try to get rid of the screen yet. Hopefully we'll get that done shortly. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. All right, so I've given 2 presentations here in the last 24 hours, and I don't need to repeat myself as far as introductions are concerned if people have already experienced that once or maybe twice. So, how many people have not seen me speak here yet? 2. So you guys are just gonna have to do that. If that's okay. Because we'll just meet everybody else the average and move the conversation forward. Quickly, I need to make it sure I grew up. Oh, this was yesterday's lesson.
There you go.
I did it this morning, but I forgot. Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is Dan Kittredge. I'm the founder and executive director of the Bionutrient Food Association. We are, I think, 12, 13 years old now. We're an education nonprofit whose mission is to increase quality in the food supply. I would say we have been foundational in coining and popularizing and building a movement around this term, nutrient density. As I explained this morning, we have been working for the past 5 years to accomplish sort of 3 key proof of concept steps. One of them is to identify whether or not there is significant nutrient variation in food within carrots, within potatoes, in this case within beef. The second thing we've been working on is to identify whether or not those nutrient variations connect to management practices in soil health. And the third piece we've been working on is to determine whether or not those nutrient variations can be assessed through handheld consumer instrumentation, please. Yeah. And as I was saying this morning, we have, I would say by middle of 2021, we feel that we've successfully accomplished that proof of concept. We have shown that nutrient variations do exist in food, and they are quite significant. You know, 2x, 5x, 10x, not 2%, 5%, 10%. That those variations do connect with management practices and soil health, soil carbon, biological activity, things like that. Regenerative practices, as it were, sort of minimal disturbance, or our polycultures, cover crops, those kinds of things certainly seem to be positively connected to increased nutrient levels. And we've built a handheld instrument that is calibrated to some of those basic nutrients, polyphenols, antioxidants, in a few crops, oats and wheat, and carrots and zucchini and mustard. We have enough data points to do that. So, yeah, that was the foundational objective, was to see whether these things were true and could be proved. And our thought was, if they are true and can be proved, then you know, our vision of disrupting the food supply through this strategy of nutrient density is a plausible vision. And so, you know, that vision effectively is that if people have the capacity to make purchasing decisions based on nutritional value in food, at least some of them will, and that will, you know, presumably apply incentives in the form of premiums to producers who are doing a better job, gives them an economic incentive there, and so using economics as a driver, sort of the greater good for the environment, and all that is very nice. I would say the broader regenerative conversation has been talking about carbon and carbon credits and things like that. When you look at the actual numbers that seem to be on the table, about say $20 per ton of carbon, or maybe 2 tons per acre of carbon if you're lucky, 30, 40 bucks an acre is something. Our suggestion is if we can use nutrient density as an economic driver, maybe your margins can go up $200 an acre instead of $20 an acre. That the opportunities, the economic incentive on a per acre basis with nutrient density premiums is more significant by an order of magnitude or more, as our hypothesis, than strictly through the carbon markets and ecosystem service markets, which are all very complex. If anybody's delved into that conversation, trying to figure out how to monitor ecosystem services and monitor carbon and track it all out, it looks like effectively most of the money goes to people doing certification. There's nothing left for the farmers. So, anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. I'm here to talk about the beef project because beef is the first crop that we have focused on attempting to understand what nutrient density is. I talked about that this morning as well. I said there are about 140 compounds that the USDA looks at when it's seeing what's in cucumbers or what's in carrots, what's in beef. 140 compounds, and elements and compounds. There's about 100,000 that have been published upon. It seems there's about 10 million that actually exist. And so, from a foundational standpoint, figuring out how to scientifically say this beef is good, this beef is decent, and this beef is bad is a big data, hard science, serious conversation. Our thought was we focus on beef as our first crop because, as I said this morning, it is the crop with the largest global economic footprint. More dollars, yen, euros, pounds are spent on beef than anything else. And it is the crop with the largest ecological footprint. More acres of land are used in the production of beef than any other crop. And so if we're going to test, run, nutrient density on anything, let's not have it be cucumbers. Let's have it be something that has a significant global footprint. So, that all being said, what I want to talk about here is what we've been doing, how we've been doing it, where we're going, what we think the next steps are, and as people have experienced, hopefully engage a Q&A to a much larger degree than a monologue, because that seems to be much more valuable for everybody involved. We started the beef project in the fall of 2021. We are partnering with a researcher he's now at Utah State University, Stefan van Vliet. He's a young, up-and-coming, I think he's actually got his PhD in human nutrition, but has been doing a lot of work with leaders in the field, trying to understand how management connects to nutrient levels in the animals and then connects to human health outcomes. When we met him in 2021, he was at Duke and he had just completed a preliminary study looking at about 40 different samples of what we thought would be well done, well managed beef and capo beef, and sort of characterizing metabolomics, which is it's a fancy word for all these fancy compounds that you may have heard about. You may have heard of terpenoids or alkaloids or phenolics, the things that we understand, maybe in people who are more well versed in plant medicine or medicinal plants, let's say broadly, herbs, spices, things like that. Those health-giving compounds that give pepper its strong flavor, or cumin, or turmeric, or mint, right? Think about those intense flavor compounds that are understood to be antimicrobial, antifungal, but anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, right? These are the potent nutrients in food. People talk about protein, they talk about calcium, they talk about potassium, but the real, what indigenous cultures globally understood about, and I think it was Hippocrates thought food be their medicine, right? The things in food that really can have those strong health-giving effects actually also have strong flavor and aroma. Plant secondary metabolites, they're generally referred to broadly, phytonutrients, alkaloids. So these are the things we've been focusing on in beef primarily. We're also looking at amino acids, levels and ratios, protein, enzymes, vitamins, and some elements, but really begin to try to characterize that higher order set of compounds that it sure looks like in the literature are the things that correlate well with positive health outcomes. So the way the study works right now, we have a vision of about 750 steaks that we're trying to get through the system. Each farm submits 3 steaks, 3 ribeyes, one from each of 3 different animals. They submit a fecal sample from the herd. They submit a forage sample or a TMR sample, depending on what the animal is eating. And if we can get a soil sample from where that fodder was produced, we will get the soil sample as well. And then we ask a series of questions about management. How old are the animals? What's the genetics? When were they slaughtered? What were they eating? How were they managed? Were they finished in a feedlot? Were they finishing on alfalfa? And slaughtered in February, etc. So we want to be able to understand the environmental conditions that animal experienced, because we're trying to overlay these nutrient levels with management practices. Because and I did say this morning, I think it's an important point. Our objective is to empower growers to understand where their limiting factors are. As an organization that we are foundationally growers of all scales, our objective is not to embarrass producers. Our objective is not to have them, when they bring their crop to market, be told by their buyer, well, your stuff's not very good. Our objective is to tease out what are the environmental conditions and the causal factors that correlate with top quality, so that growers can have access to that information in an open and empirical framework. In many cases, you may be given recommendations by a university, by a consultant, an agronomist, who may have a vested interest, and they may be trying to sell products, etc. And our thought is, as growers, we would like to know actually what does the data tell us is the most strategic thing to be doing. Is it really shifting, the species mix in my paddock? That's what I need. I don't need more mineral, or things like that. I don't need to change my genetics. I don't need to go and buy this fancy semen, right? It's actually, practically what it would be is shifting the mix of forbs and legumes. So foundationally, we designed a framework to accomplish that, not just to understand what, biochemically high-quality beef looks like, but to understand what causes it and to be able to share that openly and collaboratively. So we've been building what's called a farmer's coffee shop, or a regional coffee shop. So those who are taking part in this process will get their report out in this electronic framework, where you can see, of the 500 compounds, which ones, where your steak sits in the continuum, and also if you find farmers that did a better job than you, what were their environmental conditions? Did they have a different genetic? Were they coming from a different bioregion? Were they slaughtering a different time of year, etc. So yeah, we look at the manure for the microbiome assay, because we understand that depending on who's living in your gut, there's a lot of connections there about your overall health and function. Obviously we want to understand the organic matter and the biological activity and the mineral levels in the soil. We want to understand the mix of plant species in your fodder, and then foundationally we're looking at the meat itself. So that's the broad framework. 750 steaks. Our target is 200 farms/ranches. We'll each be submitting 3 steaks, and then 150 off the shelf to baseline against what would be considered to be the conventional, big 4 kind of what's generally available in the supply chain. And this is not a U.S.-centric project. We have people sending in samples from South America, from Africa, from Europe, Canada. So it's really, an attempt to characterize this from a global perspective, beef. not just in the U.S. but globally. So at this point, people are sending in the samples. The manure goes to a lab in Texas. The forage goes to a lab in, I think, actually Wisconsin. The beef goes to a lab in Utah. The soil goes to a lab in Michigan. And so we're in the midst of this process. We have been running the steak. Initially, it's being run in batches. So, with the fancy equipment, you want to run ideally a couple hundred samples at a time. So we collect the samples. When we've got 200 steaks, then you process them and run them all through. So we did our first run in, I think it was May or June, and our second run, I believe it was in November, but we still haven't got the data back from it. So I don't know where it actually sits in that process right now. We've run about 350 or 375 samples of these 750 that we're targeting. But it looks like we've got enough data to begin publishing, and our intention is to have our first couple papers put out by mid-year, looking at some of the amino acid profiles as well as the secondary metabolite levels and ratios. There's a lot of work left to do, digesting all these overlapping data sets and integrating them and creating a framework. This is our first time doing this, our first crop doing this. There's nobody else on the planet engaging in this kind of a framework that we're aware of, and we're a fairly small organization, so I'll use those excuses as caveats for why it hasn't happened anywhere near as fast as I would like it to. Oh, and the other minor point is that it costs $2,500 per farm to pay for it all. So we're looking at something like $1 million altogether to get this project done. So those are some of the overall context points. It's been extremely interesting to see the results coming out. I would say nothing really is surprising. There is a dramatic variation. If we just bifurcate the samples between grass-fed and not grass-fed, based on the claims of the producer, amino acid, omega-3, omega-6 ratios people are perhaps familiar with, and we can use that as one example of the kind of dynamics we're finding. We're finding some producers that are sending in samples that are in the 1-to-1 range, so like literally as many omega-6s as there are omega-3s, which is generally considered exceptional. And some producers are sending in samples that are more like 8-to-1 or 9-to-1. American Heart Association says anything more than 4-to-1 is bad for you. So, American Heart Association says bacon is bad for you because it's got a more than 4-to-1 omega-6 omega-3 ratio. Obviously, the same things apply with pork as apply with cows. What they were eating affects those ratios. So, and then we're finding some of the people that are saying they're finishing on grain that are actually 4-to-1 or 5-to-1. So there's overlap in the range. It's not like all grass-feds over here and all, beef, all grain finishes over there. It's a continuum. I think that's really the central point here, is that everything exists in a continuum. It's not like grass-fed better, CAFO finished worse. There's all these nuances that are part of this process. So one of the important points here that I didn't know about, certainly as part of this process, is that the flesh of an animal, at least the cow, is replaced about 1 to 2% per day. So what that means is your last 60 to 90 days of life, what the animal is eating during that period has a dramatic effect on what the meat is made out of. So if you're going to be finishing a cow for 6 months on grain that spent the first 12 months on range, you're basically removing a lot of the benefit that was in that stocker that was sent to the feedlot. Its overall health, its overall nutritional value dramatically is decreased because you've gone over that sort of 60 to 90 day window. So a lot of the work that we're struggling with right now is how do you take all these data sets and integrate them. We were just having a conversation about AI here just before starting. What is nutrient density? We don't know. There's no model out there of anybody ever having done this before, and so I'd like to I was hoping that by the time of this presentation, which got set up in October, that I would have more specific answers for you, which I just don't. We did do a good webinar with Stefan in the fall, where we presented a lot of the findings that show these variations in nutrient levels, and over and over and over again, there were significant ranges, between high and low in quote-unquote grass-fed and quote-unquote grain finished. So I think I made the point earlier today about organic versus conventional. I said there's some high-quality organic and some low-quality organic. So yeah, it's I think that's probably one of the essential points, is that you can't make decisions based on a label. It really has to do with the dynamics of what was occurring in that animal's life as to what the quality is. So I think I made that point this morning, reiterating it now, and I'd like to open it up to conversations, questions, and see what people's, where you're at, what you're curious about. Yeah.
How much variations do you see between the 3 steaks from each farm?
The 3 steaks from each farm generally are riding pretty close to each other. Effectively they've all gone through the same life cycle. But from a statistical standpoint, ideally you want more than 3. You want 5 or 8 or 12, but at $500 per steak, and then everything else that's cost prohibitive. So, but yeah, we're doing definitely a triplicate sample per farm, and yeah, they're dialing in chemicals. So it looks like the management practice really does have that significant effect. You can't say there's genetic differences between the animals that are showing up meaningfully. Yeah.
So just a question on, when you start to get these nutrient markers there, I guess what would, let's say someone that's, for example, like in the chicken industry, they're making eggs and they have a confinement, and they're like, well, I just want this yolk to turn orange.
Yes.
So they add like something to it, it turns it orange, but it's really not the same quality as someone that's on grass or something.
Yeah.
What stops someone from taking some of those markers and then just to alter the certain characteristics there to score higher or something? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think the point about what nutrient density, sorry, repeat the question. People know about adding flaxseed to the diet of chickens to make their yolks look more orange. As an example of getting a higher omega-3 ratio, a better omega-3 omega-6 ratio. So if you focus on one element or one compound, you can certainly spike it based on the management, the fertility, etc. Our hope is, for the definition of nutrient density, we're looking at the levels and ratios between the secondary metabolites and the amino acid ratios and the lipids and the enzymes and the vitamins. I mean, our vision is, this is all sort of original research. If people know what the concept of original research is, it basically means we don't know what the answer is, and we're just going to engage the process and see what we see. Our hypothesis is that there are levels and ratios of these things that are symptomatic of overall better function and overall worse function. So you can spike something, certainly, right? But if you're looking at this overall biochemical matrix, and that's what your definition is, then it's going to be really hard to cheat, is our idea. That's our idea. That we have to wait for the data to show us if that's true or not. It sure seems to be, and it makes sense from what we understand about biochemistry that that's the case. But yeah, how do you create a dynamic that cannot be cheated? Right? This is my experience growing up in the organic movement, watching my parents write organic certification standards and watch the standards get basically, I would say, bastardized. And so, how do we engage a framework for nutrient density that has integrity, has honor, and it's basically less expensive to do the right thing than to do the wrong thing, as it were. Yeah.
I'm just curious about freshness and how that kind of is associated with nutrient density. Like freshness of the product, going from the veggie world, so freshness is everything.
Yeah.
So just how that kind of
So that's another point that actually came up after the conversation this morning, which I think was one I should have conveyed but didn't. I had made the comment about Walmart and Whole Foods, and I said that in many cases the nutrient levels at Walmart are higher than the ones at Whole Foods. And so I'm going to just give some context to that. We're not the only ones who've studied this and found this exact thing. You know, the Walmart supply chain from harvest to shelf maybe 5 days because of their efficiencies, and the Whole Foods supply chain is 9 days from harvest to shelf. And so if you lose, say, 2% of whatever nutrient density is every 3 days, you know, and they're basically buying from the same producers. You start at 15 out of 100 because that's what the baseline is for most things. They're saying we'll start at 20 out of 100. Then when you're at Walmart and it's 6 days old, now you're at you're 16% of what it could be. And if you're at Whole Foods and you're 9 days old, you're at 14%. So the difference between 14 and 16 is not much. I mean, they're both still relatively junk. My proposal is if you pick something that's at 95 and it's 6 days old, then you're at 91. And so, yes, compounds do break down over time, but if you start at a much higher overall level of complexity, functionally what that means is your shelf life is higher, so yeah, things do degrade. Of course, there's temperature, there's humidity, there's all kinds of post-harvest packaging and processing that has been really well studied by the universities, etc. I think what they have not studied is how to have the nutrient levels at harvest be high to begin with. So, yeah.
Is there an instrument available to test these nutrient levels, and how much would it cost?
Right now, all the instrumentation that we're using costs between $250,000 and $500,000 piece, and they're benchtop in universities or a company lab kind of equipment. There are many companies that are building sort of handheld meters that could maybe be in the $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 range or $50,000 range. Working on bringing it down, but foundationally, until we know what the biomarkers are and the levels and ratios that are appropriate and the concentration ranges, we don't know what the engineering specs are for the instrument that would be appropriate for testing this, if that makes sense. It's a lot of fancy science words. Some people are tracking it. I'm sure others aren't, because I couldn't have tracked this a couple of years ago. So that's and people that regularly ask me, so Dan, you got your meter that's out there. When's it going to be ready for everybody to have access to? And I say, we've got a proof of concept meter, which is calibrated to polyphenols in carrots and antioxidants in wheat. Those are individual compounds. It's not calibrated to overall nutrient density in carrots or overall nutrient density in wheat, because we don't know what nutrient density is yet. So only after we figure out what nutrient density is, can we engineer an instrument that can be calibrated to that. My vision, my understanding of what's plausible is that eventually, there's a camera, we've got 3 or 4 cameras already in the back of your smartphone, that one of them is a spectrometer that is able to do this kind of assessment. I'm not sure if that's 5 years out or 8 years out, but.
What was that tool you had this morning?
Right here, it looks at 10 different frequencies between 360 and 140 nanometers. It's got 10 LEDs, it flashes them in sequence, and takes a picture of the light that bounces back. So, there's hundreds of different spectrometers out there in the world, right? We've made one that we are selling for $375, which most of them cost a lot more than that. One of our design considerations was, can you build something that would be available at a consumer price point that can be non-invasively used to assess nutrient levels in crops? And so, our thought was, for this whole thing to succeed, we want to make it so that all the labeling and marketing that anybody wants to do can be checked by anybody. I'm philosophically opposed to labels and certifications, personally. Like, I don't think that's good strategy. I use the metaphor of religion, and I say, is it better for there to be someone who is the interlocutor between you and the divine? You go ask this person what God has to say to you, and then that person tells you? Or is it better for you to talk to God directly? Do you want to trust a certification or a label? It's a binary, or do you want to be able to tell directly where this thing sits? And so my thought is the way to make it so that you can't, the way to make it so that the system can't be cheated is to not have a layer of bureaucracy in the middle. To make it so that anyone who wants to can directly proceed for themselves in a way that's empirical, transparent, and has integrity. So that's, for me, a foundational strategic objective. Just having had the personal experience of watching the organic system get evolved.
Yeah, so on the topic of transparency, first,
Yeah.
we want to say thank you because we, on behalf of the group of producers that we are participating in this study,
Yeah.
we appreciate that. And we also appreciate that level of transparency that we can layer into this. Like, let the consumers decide. Let the consumers decide what's important for them. Let them make the choices.
Yeah.
So that, like, we were talking about the kind of disproportionate or skewed curve this morning, right? So, like, I feel like this is the way that we can shift that curve potentially to scale by putting transparency in the marketplace. So, thank you. We're honored to participate.
Thank you for participating. Yeah, we're honored to have people in this room. I think we're participants in the project. Yeah. There wasn't a question there.
That was a statement.
It was a statement?
Yeah.
Okay. You're welcome. Yeah.
Where can we find the data to like back up your claims? Is it public information or
Which claims?
like the nutrient density and the nutrients that are stored?
Yeah, so all of our reports are on bionutrientinstitute.org. And we got the 2019 report, the 2020 report, the Greens report, the Food Desert report, the Hydro report. And those are the reports. If you want to see the raw data, there's links there to it. So yeah, I mean, we've had a very strong, philosophical position that all this should be in the commons. And yeah, so bionutrientinstitute.org is the place where it's most readily available. And the engineering for the meter, if you want to build one yourself or build a bunch of them and sell them. Right? I mean, foundationally, our philosophical position is we don't own anything. This is being held in commons. We're not a company or a nonprofit. We're an educational organization. The app, what's the statistics behind the app and how it works? That's all open source. It's not. Nothing is behind the wall, hidden strategically. Yeah. Is there a question back there?
I just had a time a few different classes today on this. If glyphosate is finding minerals, and maybe you're measuring it in a way that is available on your meter, but is it truly available for us?
Glyphosate, and is it bioavailable for us?
No, not the glyphosate, but it's binding the nutrients like zinc and different things that the zinc is not available.
So what I understand about glyphosate and how it works is that it's a chelator. It ties up some of the major cations, manganese, cobalt, copper, zinc, things like that are key enzyme cofactors. They're at the center of compounds that are used by our bodies to do all kinds of things. I use the example of sockets and wrenches for what an enzyme is. Anybody who sort of kind of understands what an enzyme is, but doesn't really understand what an enzyme is? Let me just see if I can spend 2 minutes on that, because it is actually an important point broadly. I use the example of a hoop house. I'm guessing people here are generally familiar with hoop houses. I've got a bunch of hoop houses. I'm a big fan of hoop houses. it helps me make money like most months of the year with very little effort. If you start building a hoop house, you've got a pile of pipes. It's like, you know, whatever it is, 10 feet long and 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall or something, right? It's this little pile of pipes. And when you get done building a hoop house, you have the structure that's 100 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 15 feet tall. And the only thing you really did to put that all together was to use a 9/16 and a half inch socket wrench over and over and over again. Right? You ever done this? Right? There's some bolts that are bigger and some bolts that are smaller, and nuts. And so an enzyme would be the 9/16 or the half inch. It's got a unique size and shape. It's used over and over again to put things together or take things apart. You want to take the hoop house down, you use the same socket and wrench, you just turn it the other direction. That's what enzymes are in biological systems. They're the things that are used to put things together and take things apart. So you've heard of amino acid, and you've heard of protein. Maybe you've heard that an amino acid is a bunch of, a protein is a bunch of amino acids screwed together. Or you've heard of carbohydrates and sugars. You've heard that a bunch of sugars get screwed together to make a carbohydrate. It's the enzyme that does that job of putting these pieces together. And you've got the enzyme in the plant, say, building the protein, and you have the same enzyme in your gut digesting the protein. And so think about sockets and wrenches, think about Phillips head screwdrivers and flathead screwdrivers and Allen wrenches and star bits, right? I mean, if you're a farmer, you're probably familiar with these things. That once you've got your toolkit, like, you know, you can use these things over and over and over and over and over again. But if you don't have that 9/16, you're going to get out the vice grips, and pretty soon you're going to strip it, and things aren't going to work so well. Well, all these different enzymes have elements at their core. So there's copper-based enzymes, and zinc-based enzymes, and chromium-based enzymes, and vanadium-based enzymes. And you have to have that one atom of copper at the center of this enzyme for it to work. Because every element, copper, has a certain size, like 1.5 angstroms across. It's got a unique size. And a certain bonding geometry. Like it makes 8-sided geometry or 10-sided geometry. This is just part of how it all works. So if you chelate, if you tie up all the copper, the zinc, and the manganese, and the cobalt, then all those enzymes don't exist. Then all those life processes that those enzymes accomplish are unable to be accomplished. And that's basically how glyphosate kills things, is it breaks these enzyme pathways so life can't function. So, yeah, I don't think we need to test for glyphosate. What we need to see is whether the plant was able to go, like, you can't build polyphenols, you can't build antioxidants, you can't build terpenoids, you can't build these flavor compounds, these high-order, complex nutritional compounds, much less protein or fats and oils, without these enzyme pathways functioning. Right? So when people talk about why aren't you testing for toxins, I'm like, A, because they're present in parts per billion. It's really hard and expensive to test things at parts per billion. But B, because if you've got high levels of nutrients there, then you can't have these toxins functioning in the system. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but hopefully that was a relevant and valuable tangent. Yeah.
Comment and a question. I've been thinking about this since I was first exposed to your ideas this morning.
Yeah.
So you'll have to give me a little bit of a break because I'm planning to catch up on chemistry.
You're a physicist trained at MIT and a professor at the University of
Yes,
Michigan.
and I appreciate you giving me your instrument plans.
Yeah.
We will make it, we'll see what it does.
Yeah.
My question is, I just discovered some peer-reviewed substantial literature on gut nutrient sensing. And it's all about that in aging, part of what goes wrong is in animals and other beings that we lose our ability to taste, which is complex molecules, which was part of my question this morning. So here's my question. Have you considered the gut sensing nutrient literature, because it seems to me what you need to look at are what they're looking at. So use nature as the model for what you're detecting. And in fact, your ideas are very disruptive because it really is the privileged foodies who are disrupting the food industry. There's several small farms around where I live, and they make a lot of money selling to special gourmet expensive restaurants because people can taste what food is good.
Yeah.
So I think you're a disruptor, but I'm still thinking you may be barking up the wrong tree in terms of what you're looking for. If you can show a difference in whatever it is that USDA is regulating or saying, that's the first step. So you need to get a large enough sample to show a difference. I don't think you'll be able to get AI to work with a sample of 1,000, but you can show a difference.
Well, thank you for your insight. Hopefully you're going to collaborate.
Sure.
You know, I like to say I'm a barefoot farmer, that, you know, I put on shoes to go out, and yeah, I got one pair of nice jeans, you will look at them. And I've got a BA in history, so I'm faking it till I make it. And the concept here is we're all of us together. It takes a community, it takes a village, and if we can build enough critical mass for people who have the knowledge and skill sets to engage, to seriously be partners. Our hope, our expectation is that we're not going to be the ones who come up with the answers. That we're going to create a nucleating structure around which this deeper conversation can happen with integrity. And we must have representatives from multiple fields of science and understanding at the table as we're engaging in this process of coming up with an answer to the question, what is nutrient density? I was just sharing with Melissa earlier about all the inbound we get right now. The Cleveland Clinic is an example of an organization that's reached out recently and said, we're really interested in looking at gut microbiome and nutrient density and how crops are managed, and we want to put together this big, whatever it is, NIH grant on this topic. You know, I don't know the answer to how this all works. I'm pretty sure there's something here. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that was a...
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I'm honored to be able to have gotten as far as to have serious people reaching out and offering to collaborate, because that's what it's going to take, right? Biological systems function well when you've got a polyculture. When you've got all these different energies. You can think about that with the physicists and the nutritionists and the microbiologists and the biochemists. You know, part of what we're doing right now with the beef, what Stefan's doing with the beef samples that he's getting, is he's feeding them to humans, and you know, having them pee and taking a blood sample, I'm sure 2 hours afterwards, and he's looking at the inflammation markers in their urine and blood. And you know, inflammation is one of those things that is generally understood at this point to be foundational to chronic disease. Chronic diseases, you know, cancer and diabetes and heart disease and all these things that are managed by our current medical system, not cured. And so, yeah, I mean, there's lots of work ahead of us. And ideally, it's an evolving standard, right? It's constantly improving, as opposed to organic, which is fixed, and then you can sort of take out a piece here, take out a piece there. This is an evolving standard of conversation. It's improving over time. So, yeah.
Can you talk, so on the vegetable produce side, hopefully in the near future there's going to be a scanner. On the meat side though, it sounds like for the relatively near future, the best way to do the analysis is to do what you said, like the 3 ribeyes and the newer sample or 4 sample rate. There's not currently a scanner for meat underway.
So the scanner we have for vegetables is entirely insufficient.
Right.
It's a proof of concept. I mean, strategically what I'm saying is, you know, I'm ballparking it and saying it's going to cost us $1 million to figure out what is nutrient density in beef. You're looking at me and saying, no, it's going to cost more than that. You know, what I've been saying is, let's say there's 50 crops. rice and wheat and milk and cucumbers and lamb and, apples. Let's say there's 50 crops. $1 million a piece is $50 million. When we have defined nutrient density in a crop, then we can engineer instrumentation for that crop. Ideally, we'll be able to have, the instrumentation design will work for all crops. And then you just build the algorithm. You can sort of, like a Tesla, get the update, right? The instrument's there. Once we have it all figured out, you can download, and you can now look at cucumbers when you couldn't. But yeah, we're years away from this. People say, how long is it going to take? I said, it's going to cost $50 million. So that money shows up tomorrow. We can talk about having some answers in a year and a half. If it takes 10 years to raise the money, do your math out. So it's a process. I don't want people, I love the fact that people are excited about it and say, great, I want one. But I also want to be honest about the fact that this is a serious endeavor that, I don't think is appropriately done by just one organization. One of the things that concerns me, or not concerns me, but strikes me, is for all these years that we've been working on this at the BFA, there's not really anybody else in the space who's stepping up and saying, this is important, let's put our shoulder to the wheel also. When I put these things together 15 years ago, in my mind, it was like, wow, this is massive and really important. And I've been doing what I can to try to share and be open about it and share the inspiration and work forward with it. I'm continually struck by positively how many people say this is amazing, yes, SSF works great, and I have $50 million to give to you, and B, how few other entities or organizations are stepping into seriously collaborating the endeavor. So maybe it's one of those things where it's just long, slow climb, and you hit critical mass, and boom, it happens fast. We'll see. I say bring on the capitalism. Let's have the chronic disease incidences skyrocket. Let's have the ecological, imbalances skyrocket. In many cases, when they say we're good at fight or flight, when things get rough, we're really good at figuring it out. Until things get rough, we're busy running around singing and dancing. There's a few more insights of how I think.
15 minutes.
15 minutes.
Whether it's from Walmart or Whole Foods is about 20%.
Yeah.
What's the 100%? Where are you getting that number? How do you know different species?
Great. Another one of the questions that came up after the presentation this morning was yes. From what if we've run 500 carrots, the highest number is the carrot that we have with the highest number, and the lowest number is the carrot with the lowest number. So it's the continuum we've defined so far. And ideally, that continuum could expand, right? As people begin to dial in better and better jobs, what's 100 now could be 80 in 2 years. That'd be awesome. But I'll tell you, 10% of the samples are between 50 and 100, right? 90% of the samples are between 50 and 0. The vast majority, and people who think they're doing a good job, they're regenerative, they're organic, they're biodynamic. A lot of people are sending in samples that are not high on the continuum. So I think I saw one back there.
Yeah, back to your beef project, you mentioned that you were feeding these samples of beef to human participants in the study and measuring inflammatory markers from these people.
Yeah.
What inflammatory markers are you measuring? And are you measuring the same or similar inflammatory markers in the source herds or the animals that the beef came from?
That is a question for Stefan, but I don't have the answer to. I don't know the answer. Sorry.
Quick follow-on. On the beef spectrum, I realize it's much smaller sample size. Are you seeing that same grouping where from 1 to 100, 90% are way over here in the crap area, or are you seeing more even distribution?
The problem with the beef project is that we're basically, the people who want to take part in it are some of the best practitioners in the world. So we are way oversampling the good producers. Those are the ones that are willing to front the money. Those are the ones that are saying, hey, we're doing a better job. We'd like to actually get a premium for it and believe in this. So, yeah, I mean, the variations are quite significant. I would say the people who are compelled to engage are actually doing, a lot of them are doing a very good job. So,
What's the cost of these? I don't know.
$2,500 to do the 3 stakes, the manure, the soil, the forage, and the data collection.
How much is the pace of this?
Well, right now, we had, I think, close to $250,000 we raised last year in charitable donations that we applied to any farmer who wanted to. We basically said, get on the waiting list, and if you can afford it, that's totally fine. We understand that you're a farmer. We don't want, ideally, it shouldn't be on you to do this, but yeah. So you just go to the bionutrientinstitute.org/beef and get on the waiting list if you don't want to pay for it or be part of it. And we are continuing to raise money through foundations and things like that. Yeah.
So I know you said you had an intention of testing 150 commodity steaks off the shelf. When you talk about your samples are, the good producers are overrepresented, I assume that means you haven't yet done the commodity steaks, that you're kind of saving that.
I think we've done about 50 of them. And there's been, a few dozen. We definitely have the samples that are looking a lot less nutritious. Yeah.
And then other quick question: when feeding those samples of steak to people in order to test for inflammation markers, are you doing any qualitative assessment of having people say what they think about how they taste?
I'm not actually involved in that part of the process. That's something that Stefan's doing by himself, and I'm only aware of it because he's told me. So, yeah, that's not part of our design. Our design is just looking at the biochemistry and the microbiome and the forage and the management and the soil. But logically, one would presume that, so again, a conversation that came up after my presentation this morning, if nutrient density does not connect to flavor and how you feel, it's the wrong definition, right? I want to be really clear about this. Our definition of nutrient density, if it does not overlay with pest and disease resistance, with vigor and vitality, with flavor, with shelf life, like if our definition of nutrient density does not overlay with that, then our definition is wrong, as far as I'm concerned. And the recommendation was made quite strongly that I should be focusing on flavor and not nutrition. And that if I told that story and said, we're talking about flavor here, that would be a way to engage a much broader audience, which I'm totally open to that suggestion. I'm trying to hide behind science. I've been saying for a long time, I'm trying to hide behind science. I've got a whole metaphysical perspective that I consider to be a little bit unsafe, and maybe that's not true, or maybe it is true, but the thought is we're aiming for the mainstream consciousness, and so, science seems to sort of be sitting on this pedestal right now, in how the world is looked at through our culture. So, but in general, I would say if our results do not overlap well with flavor, aroma, how it makes you feel, animal health, etc., then our definition is incorrect. That should be a foundational assumption. Yeah.
This is more of a curiosity question. I'm guessing you probably don't have the answer to it, but it's more curious. So I feel as a society, we've kind of trained ourselves on, this is about flavors. We've kind of trained ourselves on different flavors over the years as probably nutrient density has declined over the years. So do you think, and maybe you may don't, do we have to retrain ourselves on flavor? Do you think our bodies are prepared for that?
Yeah.
It's funny, but we made ourselves one way and we have to retrain ourselves.
In many cases, people say they prefer the apple that simply is sweet and doesn't have an apple flavor, or they're put off by a strong carrot flavor. They like it. So, yeah, I do think that there's been a lot of perversion of our taste buds through what we're provided and what we've had access to. If you start with a newborn and you don't give them access to processed products, they'll eat all kinds of things. It looks more like a cow what they'll eat than what you would think a human will eat. I've seen 6-month-olds that are chawing away on orange peels and love them, right? Like, what are you doing? This is a child that has never tasted candy, right? Has never had a cracker, doesn't know what these things are. So, I mean, we talk about animal instinct, and the goats know what's good for them, and the cows know what's good for them. And they say, we're animals and we've lost our instinct. I would say it's not that we've lost our instinct; it's just that we haven't trained it. I mean, if you look at, I say, people care about their drugs. They don't care about their food. So if you think about wine, right? There's all this fancy conversation about the notes, the chocolate, or the nutty of this, or the mint of the wine. How about beer? Pot. People like all about pot and all the different, compounds and flavors of pot. Like coffee, right? There's like fancy coffee that has these notes, and it's written on the bag and the label. It's like the sensitivity with which people train their palates for drugs, I think, is exactly what we're talking about. And it's just that we haven't considered our food in that fashion. We haven't said, wow, I can give a totally fulfilling experience eating carrots and cucumbers and tomatoes. Because most of them don't taste good, so you wouldn't consider it. But then you have good carrots, you're like, oh my God, that was amazing. So, I remember sort of, when I was in high school, I would be part of the musical, and my mother would bring sorry, there's some water. I'm not sure if you could like some water. My mother would bring a big bowl of carrots. She'd, you'd pick some carrots and you'd wash them and cut them up. What's that?
There's a bunch of glasses of water, but I don't know if you can
Germs were okay.
My kind of man.
I'm not afraid of germs. So, yeah, I mean, she'd bring a big silver bowl of carrots and leave them on the piano at play practice. And we're talking 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, right? Teenagers that are supposed to want candy and stuff like that. They'd be gone. Gone. Just vaporize. So, I think we're all actually animals. And when we get that experience of something that truly tastes good, it's not that hard. It's unconscious. It's really unconscious. I had that experience with my family, and we sold too many of our carrots in the fall and didn't have enough left in the food cellar for the winter, and we bought carrots from the grocery store, from our health food store we sold to. A 50-pound bag of California carrots. They sat in the cooler and rotted because no one wanted to eat them because they didn't taste good. So, I do think it's a powerful conversation, a flavor conversation. And if you've eaten a good peach, you want another one, right? So, yeah. Hopefully that counts. Yeah. I think I'm almost out of time here.
Take one more.
I've seen data before, or heard people quote data before, looking at very old carrot analysis in terms of what nutrients they contain, the usual calcium, iron, etc.
Right.
Compared to today, they I won't say blame, but they said there was probably two factors. One is how it's grown. The other one is genetics. We definitely changed genetics on plants. So is that one of your questions you asked earlier? You're going to say, I don't care what happened to it. I can't tell you why to do it, but I can tell you that this one's better than that one.
We definitely have asked every sample, vegetable or animal, what is the variety that is part of it, and certainly genetics is a piece of it. In many cases, the heirloom, open pollinated, sort of traditional things were selected for flavor, and the things that are bred for right now are not flavor. And if you talk to the plant breeders, they're like, we have access to the germplasm to breed in nutrition flavor to crops if our markets will ask for it. They're just not asking for it, so we're not doing it. So there's certainly a major opportunity there. There is this conversation about, USDA averages in 1950 of what was in crops, and from 2010 what were in crops, it's, going downward. The way the USDA does that work is they'll take, they'll buy a bunch of carrots from off the shelf from 10 different stores around the country, and they'll bring them to a lab and they'll assess them for these compounds, they'll get rid of the highs and lows and publish the average. And so what they did in 1950, what the average was, and what they got in 2010, what the average was, yes, it's gone down. The point I always want to make is there is no average carrot. Every carrot has its own story, and so you're never purchasing the average, you're purchasing somewhere in the continuum. Yeah, if we can make those determinations and make those discernments, I think we can really incentivize the focus on those increased levels. So, all right, my time's up. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you've seen there. It was pretty long, great information, and if you have a chance, you'll have to follow up on what you've learned. I know I have been. So I thank you so very much for your time and have a most pleasant evening.